All right, so good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, depending on from where you are actually signing yourself in. Welcome to the Recovery Society webinar. Very happy to have you all joining our session today to talk about the society post-COVID-19 and how the coronavirus, the pandemic, and the respective lockdowns have changed the way we shop, the way we communicate, the way we consume media, the way we talk to each other, the way we work, and share some insights from our study and our 11 theses we developed. So very, very happy that you're all in here today. Just a couple of quick house rules. I'm sure that you're all aware of these days after many webinar sessions on Zoom during the last week. So you're all on mute, but we do encourage you to ask questions at any time via the Q&A section and via the Q&A functionality on Zoom. We will have a little time for discussion at the end, so we will try to pick up all of your questions at the end and answer them if we are not managing to answer them during our presentation. Please also note that the presentation will be shared in a couple of days. So if you have to, run out for some time, no problem, and we will also record the webinar. Now, to receive the webinar recording and the presentation, you will need to be signed on. So if you have not registered, please do so. We'll share the link again on the chat. So please do register officially if you haven't done so, so that we can actually send you the presentation and the recording. And do not hesitate to reach out to us for any additional question that we might not cover today. There's so much to cover, I'm sure, and there's so much more in the research and in the thesis. So do not hesitate to reach out to us, and we'll share our contact details at the end as well. So let's get started, and let me start with introducing you to our presenters today. We have Jenny, who is our digital marketing and social media expert and was instrumental in developing the 11 theses in the beginning. So she will present you how we actually came up with the thesis and also the thesis itself on how the society will look like after Corona. And we have Bernadette here, who's our consumer research and insights expert, and she will present our study that we did with 37,000 consumers across Europe and all the findings and conclusions that we have received from that. My name is Raphael. I'm one of the managing directors of Territory Influence. I'm going to be your host today, so I'll be on and off and moderating the Q&A section at the end and some quick polls during the session. So I hope you're as excited as I am. And hence, I'd like to start actually with a little interactive session and really ask you the question about how much do you think that your own life will change due to the pandemic, and how much will it actually stay like that or go back to normal? So I'm launching the poll right now. You have the chance to please do participate. We're very keen to understand how you actually see society changing due to the pandemic and due to the lockdowns, and whether you think it will go back to normal or whether we will actually have a very different place to live in than the world looked like a couple of months ago. So I'll give you a couple of more seconds to vote. Very interesting. So most of our participants in today's webinar believe there will be some change. At least some small things in life will change, permanently. But also, substantial amount of people, a quarter of our participants believe that there are large areas of life that will change, at least temporarily, if not permanently. So let's see whether consumers agree to that later on in the analysis of our consumer survey. But before we do that, let's start actually with looking at how we came up with the whole idea of looking at the society post-COVID-19 and how we derived the 11 theses on how the society would look like. And for that, I would like to hand over to Jenny.
Thank you, Raphael. So what Raphael just said, to get a better understanding of what we will present you during the next hour, we want to introduce you to what all of this is about. And why we started to question habits and communication in the first place. We started the project end of March with the intention not to stay paralyzed in a lockdown situation, not to stay in shock, but to act instead of react, and help our brands to understand the future we as a society might become. We wanted to be one step ahead. Our aim was to understand what moves people, which fears and wishes come to light, and how this new society could look like. We call it the Recovery Society, and the following 11 theses describe what may have changed until then, based on studies, journalistic articles and observations, but also in comparison to happenings like World War II, the stock market crash in 2008, and the financial crisis in 2009. The following slides don't show a status quo as it is. We didn't concentrate on what is happening right now. We're speaking from a future status quo, and we look back from a time after the pandemic. That way, we can have a clearer look from a retrospective angle. The theses involve aspects of society, economy, environment, and digital aspects. All of our theses were translated into a Europe-wide survey to get a deeper cross-nation understanding. And also the data gave us more exciting insights and Bernadette will present to you later. For the next topic on our agenda, I'm starting right now into our 11 theses, beginning with our first one called The Joy for Life. So I'm having an issue with the presentation. Yes, now it's working. So The Joy for Life is about that we spend our lives at home for months in time of home office, Netflix, first, second, and third screens. Digital media determined our daily routines instead of spending our time outside. And because of this long-lasting sacrifice, our desire for something new and the feeling to be able to reward ourselves again leads people to actually do so. We start to enjoy and appreciate our regained freedom to the fullest. Everyday luxuries become our drugs, and pleasure does not necessarily have to be about spending a lot of money. It can be coffee on the way to work or the nice blouse in the shop window. Now that we can spoil ourselves again, the question is, why wait until tomorrow? And companies that are able to satisfy those impulsive, spontaneous needs and trigger the senses of their customers now stand out. The next thesis is called Body Improvement. The transmission of the virus was not caused by a lack of hygiene or by not washing our hands often enough. We know that. But nevertheless, because of all protective measures we had to follow, we associated that with the pandemic crisis. Don't touch anything, disinfect everything. We developed doctors' instructions to wash our hands as a habit of safety. And this habit, this feeling of safety continues now in our recovery society. Our body awareness changed. Suddenly we have an understanding that it is not about focusing on looks. We see our bodies as fortresses we have to maintain. We need our bodies to be strong and healthy, work out, take our vitamins, because a strong system gives us a feeling of being protected, and communication has to reflect this new body image. Jumping to the third one, we walk away from do-it-yourself and introduce to you our next thesis, Did It Myself. On-demand economy and high-maintenance society might come to an end. During the pandemic, we had to deal with the tasks we outsourced for years, just out of laziness. Because why care about that stuff myself when I can pay experts to do them for me? Skills like repairing household devices, cooking dinner, or cutting our own hair, everyday skills. We were forced to solve our problems on our own. We developed a mentality of actually getting things done. Self-sufficiency, here we come. We have a new awareness of mastering challenges and our own abilities again. And because we can make it work, we gain new confidence. We want brands to understand this, appreciate our skills, and demand to communicate at the same eye level with us. We want them to be just as aware of our abilities as we are now. Triggered by existential threats and complex global relations, we questioned ourselves and our system more critically. We became the critical mass, as if all of a sudden we became aware of contexts we never wanted to know about before. We think about the facts that nurses earn way too little money, or that I can't get my medicine because industry in India is paused. A new era of clarification begins. And whoever wants to reach us must come with waterproof arguments and real transparency. We can expose anything within a few clicks on the internet. The lowest price, highest profit, and on-demand shopping are no longer the highest value for more than a view. Communication has to withstand the critical and reflective recovery society. Fairness and honesty are more important than ever before. The next thesis we're talking about is collective euphoria, a feeling of connection and joy within the society. The only way we will have survived the pandemic is by going through it together. The crisis polarized and split our society. Some helped each other by going grocery shopping for the neighbors. Film productions donated medical material. Others focused on saving themselves, like Adidas, who wanted to save their rents despite of making billions of profit. The pandemic just wasn't the right time to have a big ego. Positive feelings from overcoming difficult times have burned into our memory. Bad memories got repressed. Brands that managed to contribute to a society in a similarly meaningful way as nurses, postal workers, our everyday heroes, as we call them, are perceived and valued. They've become our love brands of the recovery society. Next to our collective euphoria, we also have the part of the open wounds remaining. The months of stress, lack of privacy, fear of the future, domestic violence, human losses, and in general, the overload of feelings leave their mark. Furthermore, we are overwhelmed after life gained its normality again. Mental illness increased in a broad mass of people. More people are affected by the crisis than by anything ever before. Now is the time to be more sensitive, to communicate gently, and to stand by one another. Everything that now brings well-being needs open ears and hearts. Brands that can provide healing and help are expanding these as added value and create a competitive advantage beyond the pure product benefit. This perspective, called ambient wellness, expands the thesis, the body improvement we already talked about, focusing on ourselves to spaces. In times of the pandemic, rooms, if they weren't our own, were potential minefields full of viruses, because we simply cannot control what is happening inside of them. The stationary trade was dying. We stopped spending our time there. Curfews and increases in digital commerce like one-click shopping or delivery services fueled this situation even more. To bring back customers to the physical stores, room has to appear healthy and organic. The healing effect of a spa entered the room, affecting furniture and a sense of space. We get used to simplified physical actions through digital or virtual services. Amazon Go shows us how to go shopping without touching physical objects by using QR codes. Or Stella McCartney and Airlab opened up a store with the cleanest air in London by using air filters and moss. This thesis does not only support minimalistic ambience, smaller retail and storage spaces, and fewer customers, but also provides hygienic, virus-free purchasing. The thesis, Local Lovers, starts with the awareness how dependent we are on each other. Globalization became the black sheep because, truth be told, without it, the virus couldn't have spread this easily. Global logistics got harder to stay maintained, but we depended on them. There's even more to our local lovers than global economy. We, as private consumers, focus on domestic products and offers because we want to support our local restaurants or cinemas. They give us a feeling of home and basically create a cultural microcosm. Translated into a communication, this means that companies that support this feeling and react on local alternatives appear approachable and save themselves a space in customers' hearts. My browser, because social distancing will have made the internet to our best friend. It's about shifting our lives into cyberspace. It's about hobbies, education, payment, doctor's appointments, meaning telemedicine, only at the push of a button, even for people being reluctant about digital services before. The browser as a service point. It took a global virus to finally be accepted by everyone. Brands that transfer their touchpoints and service into the digital world are favored. Those who can't upgrade or are simply overstrained get forgotten under the consumer's demands. Our manners with social media will also have changed. We called the next thesis digital striptease. In isolation, our desire for social contact increased. We soon realized how little comments or likes are worth when you're alone. And that is why social networks became social again. We used video calls and direct messengers instead of scrolling through the platform's news feeds. The need of affirmation decreased and a new form of aesthetics was rising, authentic stay-at-home content. Without perfect lighting and filters, not Instagrammable at all, but warm, compassionate, and creative. Brands who want to reach the recovered society on social media have to do two things: communicate on a personal level and rely on creativity to impress customers. Brands have to blend in consumers' social networks. Our last thesis is called the humble human. COVID-19 will have shown us how defeatable the human race really is. A virus of microscopic size paralyzed the lives of millions around the globe, while carbon emissions sank to an all-time low and Mother Nature started to breathe again. By now, we will have understood how easy environmental protection can be implemented and what difference it actually makes. We question our selfishness and arrogance as a species more consciously. We need to contribute to protecting the environment. Companies that facilitate and enable conscious consumption and furthermore share our beliefs are favored more than ever before. So next, I'm giving the stage back to Raphael. Raphael, you're still on mute.
Sorry, I had to take back the control first. Thanks a lot for that. Now that we presented the 11 theses, we would be obviously interested to understand from our audience, where do you see yourself most? So what is the one thesis that really resonates mostly with you? So I'm launching the poll right now. Would be really interested to see, which of these theses resonate most with you. So very interesting. A lot of votes also for Did It Myself. And a lot of votes for Joyful Life. So I can already tell you, you will be surprised about the reaction of the consumers we ask about those theses. So thanks a lot for sharing your own personal reflection about it. So Joyful Life was actually the one you see most yourself in, followed by Body Improvement, Local Lovers, and Did It Myself. So let's see what the consumers in Europe were saying about these 11 theses, and how we set up the research to really understand consumers' opinions about the future post-COVID-19. And happy to hand over to Bernadette for the consumer insights part.
Thanks, Raphael. Let me, before we take a look into the results, I want to first show you what we did to gain the results. And we started off with 11 theses. These were our basis for the survey. And in order to get a sense or to have a good measure of these 11 theses, we decided to have each thesis operationalized in 4 questions. You see them on the bottom here. You've just met the humble human, explained by Jenny, and we have 4 questions for each thesis, which are measuring this thesis. You see that some of the questions has a core, which is measured by all of the questions for this thesis. For example, question number 1 is about environmental protection, the personal perception of this, and question 3 says if you want to whether you want to know what favorite companies are doing to protect the environment. However, we also have different aspects and different facets in each thesis. So you see that we also not all 4 questions take on the same point, but have different aspects of the thesis to measure. And you may have calculated we have 11 theses, we have 4 questions, meaning 44 questions, which is quite a lot for a consumer survey. So we decided to split the questions and have 2 same issues here. Just a sec, we'll be right back. Okay. So what we did is have the 4 questions for each thesis and divide them into questionnaire versions A and B. Participants were then randomly assigned to the questionnaire versions. So each participant received 22 questions. We asked for agreement on a 5-point Likert scale for being from not agree at all to fully agree. And what we did afterwards is to see if these questions were measures of the same thesis. We calculated the mean correlation of items measuring the same thesis. For those of you not familiar with correlations, they have a range from -1 to +1, and +1 meaning that if you answer question A in a single way, you really have a high probability to answer question B in the same way. So we see here with middle correlations of 0.5 that the questions did measure the core of the thesis. For example, the humble human is about being not being the center of the world anymore and taking care of the environment, but we also have questions that measure different aspects. For example, what are companies doing for environmental protection, rather being conscious about what I am myself are doing is doing regarding environmental protection. And in accordance or in addition to the questions, we also had some social demographic questions. Of course, we are interested in what different groups among customers say regarding our pieces. So we asked for relationship status, number of children in household, professional status in industry, and via Transfer, the tool we used to advertise the survey and spread out all over Europe, we already knew age, gender, and country. So this was a good basis from the territory influence database in order to get to know our customers and participants. And what the people taking part in the survey have been 37,027 in total. I'm going to go back because this is a sneak peek of the results. Okay, this was too fast. I'll be right back with the correct slide. So I wanted to talk about the sample. We have 37,000 people who have taken part from 12 European countries, which is a good sample size, giving us the opportunity to have really great conclusions. On the bottom, you see on the right chart the distribution among countries. The other 4 countries had about 250 participants. So we just showed the main countries here, and having especially many answers from France, from Germany, from Italy, and from Spain. And the mean age across the population was about 40 years, really quite similar in both samples. And what we did is not rather take a look at the age, but also take a look at the generations to see that we have a high proportion of millennials who've taken part in the survey, big consumer group in general, as well as the Gen X. The silent ages, just about 100 people, but we have their opinion nevertheless. Furthermore, also the number of children is quite similar in both samples. And what we did have, in fact, is a huge female overlap. We've been used to that in our surveys across the Transphere in Europe. But however, we have to take that in mind in our interpretation that we have mostly a female look, but I think regarding generations, regarding countries, you have a good distribution. So you just seen a sneak peek before. Now we want to get into more detail regarding the results and the learnings, and especially what conclusions we've drawn from our results. And taking reference to your quick poll, maybe you just take a look back and think about what you've rated for in the quick poll, which thesis resonated most with you. Let me first show you the overview of the thesis with the results. You have on the top left the thesis with the highest agreement scores across all participants, being body improvement. 61% of all participants agreed to the questions we ask here. And on the bottom right or middle, we have the thesis with the lowest agreement scores, which is Joy for Life, that resonated most with you in the quick poll. And in fact, this was a thesis we all discussed a lot beforehand, because everyone could resonate with it, but we see that consumers have a more different look, a more detailed look. What we see in the middle here are different theses. Well, really with agreement scores that are not differentiating that much. Have, for example, digital striptease, also 44% going into the 50s above here. So you see there's some differences, but to get the more interesting stuff and results, we go into detail now. I want to invite you to go on with 3 deep dives now to take a detailed look in the results and what the individual groups are saying. So we start off with a deep dive regarding the thesis did myself, reached an agreement scores of 59%, and you see the questions on the left here, which were used to measure did it myself. We have a question with a high agreement score regarding what the pandemic has done. It has made me more open to take on everyday challenges such as minor repairs or cooking experiments myself. So we see the consumers really getting more independent, try to take on their everyday chores by themselves. Also, trying to master their lives without the help of others, and find out how things work. So not only getting things done, but also know how they work in detail. And we also have a big trend, or rather small trend, regarding insourcing. We have about half of the people who are saying that they try to insource things. This is the overall look, what all participants have said. Of course, we've taken a look regarding different groups, what they were saying in the results. And what we see, or what we've observed, is that Generation Z is the class leader in all aspects of Did It Myself. The young generation, people between 18 and 24, try to expand their own skills. Their agreement scores regarding these items range from 62 to 72%, showing that they really try to be independent, try to be responsible, and try to help themselves. And also millennials are open to take on everyday challenges by themselves. And the generation that rather has been into outsourcing before, not only their everyday tasks, but also by their consuming, for example. What we also find was interesting that especially people living in together with at least one child, just to shorten it up, speaking of families, they have great interest in finding out how things work. What a hypothesis is that people have to stay at home now, have to stay at home with their kids, and kids are curious. They want to know how things work, and they get their parents to find out how things work. So brands explaining to people how things work and how they can manage things are getting popular with millennials, getting popular with families across Europe, for example. What we see in general is that consumers want to know how things work and at the same time consume sustainably. You remember the correlation I explained before. We have a correlation of 0.5 here. So if people say they want to know how things work, they at the same time agree to the question that they want to consume sustainably in their everyday life. They also perceive a balanced lifestyle as important health protection, also with a correlation of 0.5, and they are more open to digital services for mastering their lives. So if you as a brand or as a company address these things, see or communicate on eye level with your consumers and show what digital services are available, for example, consumers will be interested in your communication, in your brand. So this was the first deep dive regarding data myself, which on the cover was quite a stable agreement score, but you see in detail there's more to see and more to discover. So the next deep dive would be about open wounds, having an agreement score of 56%. And what we observe here is the question with the highest agreement score of all questions throughout the whole survey. Across all groups, every person is perceiving, 84% of the participants are perceiving an increase of mental stress due to the pandemic. I think everyone has to take a look at themselves and says yes and agrees with this question. So this is the question with the highest agreement scores across all. This didn't really surprise it, but what was surprising for us is the difference to question 2. We also asked if people will talk more openly and more often about mental illness, and only 36% agree to that. So there's a huge difference of nearly 50% between mental stress appearing and talking about mental illness. Of course, mental stress and mental illness are 2 different things, and not every stressor ends up into mental illness, but nevertheless, if mental stress appears, there should be an open climate to talk about mental stress or mental illness being a more crucial factor. So as a brand, you may create a climate that people feel open to talk about what's stressing them out at the moment, how they can be helped, for example. But people are not only perceiving that there will be more mental stress, they also are cautious for that, and they are taking better care of their own mental health. At least 58% of the participants say so. And what we've seen is that if people take care of their own mental health, they also tend to care more about their physical health. So it's all it all comes together in a balanced lifestyle, being a good basis to cope with COVID-19 and the changes that are about to come. What we see in general is that, especially people being very young, agree to open wound statements. The Gen Z says that has an overall agreement score for open wounds 62%, so only 2/3 are saying yes, there will be open wounds. And what now hypothesis about that is that Gen Z, for Gen Z, this is the first crisis they are experiencing. They were too young to see the world in the financial crash of 2009 or in the stock market crash of 2008. So Gen Z sees or experiences this as the first crisis, and can be addressed by companies with help and with ways to explain what is happening and how to cope with that, for example. So to give them some orientation throughout COVID-19. So open wounds being a strong factor of the COVID-19 post society. And our third deep dive is a more digital topic, being digital striptease as a thesis, with 44% agreement overall. What we see here is that social media is getting social again. So more than half of the people say they use social media more often to interact and be in contact with the people they care about. Also, they say they are less interested in receiving likes. So it's more about social contact in times of social distancing, especially for Gen Z. Gen Z has gotten to know social media more as a broadcasting tool, and now they see what they can also do with it, being in social interaction with people. So it's not about broadcasting out into the world, but also to communicate about things. What we also observed is that female users state a higher need to stay connected via social media, having difference to male users of 14%. And especially people from countries that have been hit hard by the pandemic are less interested in receiving likes. We see agreement scores from Italy regarding question 3 of 62%, and from Spain of 64%, especially people who had strong, hard lockdown conditions in the last weeks turn to social media to get into contact with other people rather to receive likes. However, despite being locked at home, content authenticity has not increased. Our hypothesis was that if you are locked at home, cannot travel the world, you have to get creative at home and do not have many ways to create a different picture rather than an authentic one. But nevertheless, users say that they do not have a feeling. Only 23% have the feeling that social media content is more authentic. So regardless of generation, of country, of relationship status, this has not increased. However, nearly half of the people say it's getting more creative. So maybe this is an option for brands and companies in their communication, since there might be expectation of more authentic content, but that has not gotten true right now. So you see, getting deep dives into the thesis opens up a broad picture of what people are thinking. And what we did now is to create a broader picture regarding commerce or e-commerce in special, to summarize questions from different theses. We've seen before that Joyful Life was a thesis that resonated much with you, also resonated much with us, but people did not agree a lot with it. Only 28% said they more often treat themselves to the things that they have denied themselves before the pandemic. So despite being locked down, being deprived of entertainment and shopping opportunities, people do not compensate for more consumption. This is one of the 5 questions with the lowest agreement scores throughout the survey. But shopping is not cancelled. It's the way of shopping is important for people. Regarding ambient wellness, participants said that they are more concerned to make purchases as germ-free and as contactless as possible. So 70% perceive that the way they are doing their shopping and making their purchases is important. They want to stay without contact to other people and have a feeling of a healthy environment. But they do not necessarily use digital shopping opportunities. So you see a difference between question number 2 and question number 3. We suppose that if people want to shop germ-free and contactless, they prefer suppliers who digitize part of their shopping, for example, by click and collect. But participants differ. We think they still want to get out and not only be in contact via the internet. They want to shop in stationary shops, but they want to have a healthy environment doing so. Gen Z is being the one outlier regarding digitization. They want digitization in every aspect. They prefer it. You see it in question 4 regarding digital accessible online accessibility of employers, doctors, and providers, which has agreement score of nearly 2/3 of the population. And Gen Z has a even higher agreement. They 3/4 of them say that they want their touch points to be accessible online, whereas older generations, Gen X, boomers, silent agers, and people with kids want to support regional businesses. You see that on the thesis Local Lovers, which has agreement scores of 64% for 3 of the 4 items. So this resonates a lot with older generations. So communication and you get in touch with older generation via regional, local aspects, but with the Gen Z, you have to be accessible online and communicate on a digital level. So that was our focus on commerce, and I've just pointed out to the differences between the generations. And if we go back to an overview, you see it on this level, having the generations on top and the different theses or the agreement to the different theses here highlighted. And for example, there are theses that resonate a lot with the younger generations. Did it myself here has the highest agreement scores for Gen Z for millennials, whereas thesis with local lovers resonates more with the older generations. So you see there's still huge amount of data to be analyzed if you want to aim at different generations, different countries, for example. So summing up the short view into the results and giving back to Raphael. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bernadette. Very interesting, particularly to look at also the differences between generations, for example. So as Bernadette mentioned, I mean, there are a lot more insights available. So one of the things we would be interested in, again, is understanding from you which of the theses that we haven't touched on. So we did some deep dives on body improvement and open wounds and on digital striptease. But on the other 8 theses, which one of those are you mostly interested in to see a similar deep dive to really understand more about these theses and how they actually how they impact marketing and commerce. So just launching the last poll for today, and I should say, and I forgot actually to tell you before, that all these polls are anonymous, so apologize for that. You don't need to be concerned to share your opinion because these are anonymous service. So very interesting to understand, which one of the other theses you are interested in to better understand, and so that we know, what to prepare next. And I see a lot of need for going into more deep dives for local lovers, which is great, which is a great thesis actually, and also for body improvements, which could be both very interesting for marketing and advertising and retail. So thanks a lot for that. So it seems like we need to do another deep dive for local lovers but also body improvements and potentially my brows are very interesting. So there's a lot of details, as I said, and I think a lot of more questions from your side, for example, about, different breakouts per gender or different breakouts for, people who, depending on their relationship status. And I think you, Bernadette, mentioned that, there are some significant differences depending on, whether people are in the family, in a relationship, particularly whether they have kids. So there's a lot to, dive into. We also looked at, different occupation and different industries that people are working in. So again, we're able to, dive into those breakouts to see how that differs, and whether there are differences between those professions. So if you want to have, any of these insights, please do reach out to us. We will also, contact you to ask you whether you're interested in, having a deep dive for your particular target group or for your country, or, have an in-depth discussion about your particular brand, your category you're working in, your industry you're working in, and you're very, very motivated and looking forward to, really enter into a discussion with all of you to see, how the research can support your brand and can support your business. But we do have a little bit of time for Q&As. So I want to, at that stage, introduce you to the rest of the team who was instrumental in, setting up the thesis, in doing the research, and in preparing the webinar. And I will, we might actually reach out to some of them to answer some of your questions. But I think the first one is aimed at Bernadette, which is a question about the research. Do you see big differences between the countries? You mentioned the demographic differences, but not country differences. Is there a significant difference how consumers in different countries perceive the 11th thesis?
We have some differences across the countries. Of course, they're sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. And what we focused here on it was first on a thesis that has different, also has an interesting aspect being digital striptease, because that was one with the strongest country differences. But of course, there are differences across countries, not only at thesis level, but also on question level. But there was a bit too much material to show it over here, unless we have another 2 hours or 3. But yes, there are some differences.
Yeah, so I think that is one of these deep dives. We're very happy to, follow up individually if you're interested in, particular country, on how consumers in that country responded to the 11th thesis, or what are the implications for marketing, for brands. Do reach out to us. We're very happy to share those details with you. The other question we got was, does your data indicate that there is any likelihood for a complete shift back to the old normal? So I guess, a lot of people are interested whether there's a chance that, things will go back to normal, to the way we all used to work and live and shop. Jenny, Bernadette, do you see any chance for that, or is the world going to change? I think you're, still muted. Thanks, Jenny.
I mean, there's always a possibility to fall back into old habits, but there were changes before. There were some points in history that just had dimensions we couldn't see before. And I think, of course, there is always a possibility that we go back to normal in 1 or 2 years, but there's I think there's a great chance, and also a hope that some of these theses, some of these what we found out could stay in our lives. Something like, I mean, the digital transformation is something we get used to now. I don't think that this is something that we go back to afterwards, for an example.
I totally agree with you, Jenny. There's always a chance to go back, but I think people have been forced now to experience new situations. They might not have voluntarily experienced before, but they got to know other ways to communicate and to work, and I think they will keep the stuff that they liked. And this would prevent them from going back to normal or to the status before the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other question we got was, does your research answer the question if shoppers will go back to brick and mortar retail, or will they stay on e-commerce? I think very interesting question that a lot of brands are thinking about these days.
So I think that will be a mixture, depending on which group, on which kind of consumers you want to address. We've seen before that that people of the rather old generations, like boomers and silent ages, they still stick to stationary shopping. They want to support local businesses and regional businesses, of course. But this is something that is more located in the stationary shopping environment. However, if you target the younger generations, you need to be accessible online, and you need to have a digitized part of shopping experiences.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I also read that brands that didn't have a strong presence on digital during these last 2 months, they will basically not exist anymore because you were forced to move everything to digital. Just encourage everyone again, if you have questions, please use the Q&A section in your Zoom app or browser, so that we can answer to those. One of the questions we did receive is, would it be possible to extract these theses and show what the implications would be for certain industries? So for example, travel, which is going to be one of the most affected industries by the COVID-19 virus. I do remember that we did have, I think, a couple of thousand people working in the travel industry among the research, so that should be possible, right?
Yes, absolutely. We have quite a big database of people working in travel, also people working in public services, for example, which also has some experience, some difficult months. So yes, it's absolutely possible to take a look into these results and what the people of these groups are saying.
Great. Another question was from somebody that they had a feeling that the theses are too positive. What do you think of some more kind of negative, dramatic, dystopian scenarios for the future? Maybe that's a question for you, Jenny, or you can pass it on to one of our hidden panelists.
I mean, all of the theses also contain negative facets or possible flip sides. It's always one way or the other. It's also an aspect of the survey to understand the thesis more precisely. Which hopes and wishes are more pronounced? Is the joy for life, for example, a pronounced theme, or only a more strongly represented in certain sub-societies? And maybe the joy for life is also a good example to go directly into the other way. Of course, there's also even a possibility to go the negative way. But yeah, I mean, I think we not all of them are positive facets of both sides, but decided on which way to go, I think.
Cool. There was another question about the rise of social media during the pandemic, and how do we believe that will develop now after the pandemic? Will consumers, deinstall TikTok and House Party and all the other social media apps, or are they gonna stick to it? Jenny, you're still on mute. Sorry.
Yeah, thinking about the question right now. It's I personally think that there is a high to those platforms right now, but it's like evolving new habits too. It's because TikTok, for example, like you mentioned before, it's a platform who gives you a good mood, who you can see people dancing, and you can just blend out all those negative vibes, those facts about the coronavirus. That's some things I think the people get used to, get new habits, and will stay on the platforms. But I think it's hard to say in how much they will, you know?
Yeah, I would agree. There's another question by one of our participants. And it's more towards Bernadette about the methodology, how the answering options have been designed. So was it like a rating from strongly agree to strongly disagree?
Yes, we had a 5-point Likert scale, being the most positive answer of I strongly agree, and the most negative answer of I totally disagree. And we also had a middle option of neither agree nor disagree, because some answers or some aspects you might in parts agree with, but in parts do not agree with. For example, you want your employer to be accessible online, but you do not want a doctor to be accessible online in terms of data protection.
Perfect, thanks a lot. The last question we have received is what should I do now as a marketer to be ready for the recovery society? Well, that is a difficult thing to answer, and let me jump actually on that because it leads me nicely to our closing remarks. That really depends on what your brand is, what your product is, what your target consumer group is, and what country you're living in. So to go into that level of detail, that would have been impossible as a part of that webinar hour. But that's where we really like to engage in a discussion with you individually to better understand what is your brand, your industry you're working in, your target group, your country, to be able to then look into our research and really dig out data that is exactly matching your question. So we do encourage you to reach out to us and invite you to basically contact us. I'm just pulling up again the email address. Feel free to write us a quick email. Tell us what industry you're working in, what is your brand, what is your target consumer, and we'll be very, very happy to schedule a call to look into all the details of our research that perfectly fits your needs and objectives, and provide you with all the details we have found during our research and studies. So do reach out to us. We will also be back to everyone who has registered. If once again, if you haven't registered yet, there is in the chat, there is the link to our registration page. If you do sign up, we will send you automatically the recording of the webinar and the presentation deck. And again, maybe that's easier than to just answer and let us know what specifics you're interested in, and we'll be very happy to schedule a call and go through more details with you. So thanks a lot. That leaves me just to say thank you to all the participants. Thanks to all our colleagues who made this event happen. Thanks to you. I hope you enjoyed it. And look forward to hearing you soon, and look forward to engage with you in a discussion about how the research and how these findings can help your particular brand. Thanks a lot, and bye-bye.